reality of being in the woods. This is the developed part of our property here, and for some time we've been talking about how to use the upper part of the property, which is really the most beautiful part of the property. And so we've been designing and working on developing a trail that will come off of the lawn here. And so the trail right now is just in rough form. It's been cleared and mowed. And we will then see to what extent we develop it more thoroughly. So we bought the property in 1986. It was originally a farm, and so we moved in to establish our headquarters here. And this upper wooded part of the property, very few people have been up there. And the one time that I got all the way up to the top of our property, we have a total of 9 acres, sort of in a narrow lot. The one time I got up there, I realized that that's really the most beautiful part of the property, and realized, why don't we make some use of it? So a key part of developing a trail so we have access to it really have been two key things. One is just to use it for people who are on our property, to be able to take a break and walk up and enjoy nature. The other thing is that an essential part of what Orgonomy is about is a functional thought method, which is really based on observe, observe, observe until a conclusion comes to you, rather than drawing conclusions from a preconception. So this is an opportunity to extend what we do in our biophysics lab courses, which is we come out on the lawn, have people just make observations of nature. This will give us a much richer, much broader place to do that kind of teaching of how to really develop a natural approach and a functional approach to observation of nature. So that became a significant motivation for me to do it, in addition to just having access to the beautiful part of the property. We'll see as we go up the trail. The lower part clearly was farmed. There is a stone wall that we come to where I think they took the stones out of the area they were plowing and built that barrier, probably as a barrier, maybe for sheep, but the part above it looks like it was never developed. And our landscape architect who worked on the trail with us, who's very knowledgeable in terms of natural phenomena here, says it looks like that's pretty much very old woods that's never been cultivated. Yeah, as I said, this has basically been mowed. They cut down some of the smaller trees to just clear a good 6 to 8 foot path. And so you have to be careful walking on it. There's still stumps, but this will be mowed several times a year to eventually get it down to a point where it's just a good walking trail. And you can see there's a variety of species. This particular tree, I think, is one that Dave, our landscape architect, told us we have some native wild persimmon trees, which I was not even aware we had on the property. This is one of the native persimmon trees, and this is an example of the persimmon fruit still on there, and that gives you an idea of the size of them. And what I hadn't realized till we were walking around with Dave, they're both male and female persimmon trees. So this is clearly a female with lots of the fruit still on it. And we will see what the animals do over the winter in terms of eating them. So this area over in here, we're in a section that it actually is designated wetlands. And eventually we may try to develop some access by having some boardwalk areas through that. But at this point, the trail is just the cleared part that we have. I want to point out something here, that this vine here, Dave, our landscape architect, as I said, pointed out the difference between invasive vines. So this is a wild grapevine, and the native vines actually hang out away from the trunk. They don't end up smothering the trunk. The invasive vines, which we'll show you some later, end up actually being so heavy they might kill the tree. So those are some examples of the more invasive kinds of vines that hang close in on the tree. So over here we see, right by the trail, an example of a young native holly tree. These are native to this area. And as I said, it's still pretty rough with roots, so you have to be careful walking on it, but it still has given us quite good access to the area. Dave has encouraged us to keep a lot of the stumps, the dead trees, because they also form a habitat. But you can see here woodpecker holes where they have been extracting the insects and other things under the bark. So it's one of the things that finding the balance between clearing enough to have access and leaving things natural for the birds and other animals to live. So here we're getting into, as you can see, a little more dense area with a lot of shade. So that's what's great about the whole property is it varies from dense woods to open areas, so that the trail has tried to illustrate and bring us into all those different parts. So you can see the leaves are actually falling. So we're one of the great things about the property is that it covers the whole range of somewhat open areas to more dense areas. So in this here we're into denser area, and just some of the beautiful fall foliage. So I think this trail is going to be great to have people just experience the property at different times of year. So now here just a bit more of a slightly more open area, so we get the sunlight coming through in this area. And I'm looking forward to being able to walk the trail different times of day, the different seasons, and I hope that's what other people will be able to do to enjoy it. So there's still some old features from the farm, and so people are at this point are going to have to be careful walking the trail. But this looks like where they had dug some swales to have the water run off. But it's signs of the old use of the property. So here we get to that major dividing point that I'd mentioned before, between the lower part of the property that had been cultivated in the past, and then this stone wall. When they cleared the trail, they obviously cleared the stones out of that section so we can get through it. But that stone wall goes all the way across from that side of our property to this side. So once we cross this line where the stone wall is, from the part that had been cultivated to the other part, you can actually notice some significantly larger trees like this one over here, and the variety of trees starts to change. So if you just stop and observe, you see a lot broader range of trees than on the lower part of the property. So the other thing you can see is in this part of the property there are a lot more stones, right? This is much more just the native kind of land. Here we've entered a little grove of beech trees. So these ones that the beeches hold their leaves much later in the fall than many others, but you can recognize them by the smooth gray bark. I always think of them like the legs of an elephant. They have like an elephant hide. And one of the things that's fascinating is that often when an old beech tree dies, little shoots come up from the broad roots that are spread out. So many of these might have actually come from one tree, so that a grove will spring up where an old tree has died. To me, there's nothing like the way the light comes through beech trees. Look down this way, you'll see the beech trees, you see the gold of the hickories, and then the red leaves of the maples. There's some dogwood trees in there. So again, a wonderful variety of trees. So in this section here, they've wound the trail between the stones, and you can see just the field of stones exposed, that have not been moved by man. I mean, even the lichen on the stones indicates, that they've been there for decades, if not hundreds of years. So over here is behind the beech tree in front is a large oak tree, a great example of a mature oak tree on our property. And I love how the designer wound the trail, as we said, between the rocks, between the trees, just letting us see the whole property. From here, you can actually see the chain link fence of our neighbors. So we're up at the top of our property here. And then the trail will wind us back down towards where we started. And here is one of many patches of ferns, and ferns are a sign of the understory of a very healthy wood. So I love ferns. It's wonderful just to see them growing here. And we have many varieties of ferns on the property. So some ferns turn colors, start to turn brown or yellow just as the leaves do. But this fern over here is one that I actually know the name of. It's called Christmas fern because they stay evergreen at least through December. So I think that's how they got their name. But you can see compared to the other ones, these have stayed green. So this is an example of what Dave told us is a nurse log. I was not aware of that term, but some logs, as they deteriorate, they hold the moisture, and if you look closely, you can see little seedlings. And he said even in a drought, these logs will hold enough moisture to allow new trees to continue to grow even during dry periods. So there's a variety of different kinds of tree seeds right along that log. So I think it's a great term, nurse log. So again, I learned a lot from walking the trail with Dave, and he pointed out this is an ironwood tree. It was used in colonial times as having the hardest, toughest wood, and literally the wood of these were used as cogs in the gears of mills. They're so tough. So this is going to be an ongoing project to keep the dead branches that fall down cleared. In fact, we're hoping to have volunteers that will work and just help keep the trail cleared and easy for people to use. So here's an example of what we mentioned before about invasive vines that weigh down a tree and actually can kill it. All of these are invasive vines as opposed to the native ones that hang out farther from the trunk. And another tree there that's been so weighted down, the tree is actually dead. So that will also be part of our ongoing project, is to have volunteers that can help us clear out some of the invasive species to try to allow the native species to flourish more. So here we have a whole collection of hickory nuts. We obviously must be under a hickory tree. So one of the things I love about hickory trees is the way they turn that golden color in the fall. So this is a newly fallen tree that's come down since we walked the trail. I think it's just a little more than a month ago. And that's all part of being in the woods is new seedlings come up, trees fall down. Obviously we'll need to clear this off the trail, but we want to leave as much of the material here because the rotting logs are just part of the recycle of nature. You know, this eventually could turn into one of the nurse logs as we talked about. So this is one of the largest trees on our property. If I stand by it, you'll get some sense of its dimensions. And it's what Dave calls a witness tree, that this has been around a couple of hundred years. A beautiful specimen of a white oak. So now the trail has come back full loop back down to the stone wall that I said that cuts all the way across our property. We're now at the other end of that stone wall and going back down to the part of the property that was cultivated previously as opposed to just the native woods. Now we're down to another ecosystem and an opening in the forest canopy that really, unfortunately, it's been invaded by a lot of invasive species, and our hope is to eventually start to clear those out, to open this up as a more natural meadow. And it's the kind of place that we hope eventually to develop some seating places where we can have outdoor classrooms. So this section of the trail originally was going to go down through there, but as the designers realized once they were out actually here on the property, it wasn't possible to cut through that. It would have been much more difficult. So they did clear a few of the dead logs here in order to have the trail come across this way. So, you know, you can make a design from a map, but that doesn't mean you can actually do that once you're on the property. Dave pointed out that this is a natural part of the history of a forest and the development of it, is that wind may blow over a tree, the root system will sort of dig up a hole on one side, and it's the nature's way of tilling the soil. So eventually this will start to deteriorate, but there'll still be what he called a pit and mound area in a woods, and that often is an indication of where a tree fell. And you'll see the open pit on one side and then a mound where the root system was pulled up and broke down then into a pile of soil. But this is a relatively fresh one. So that trail that we just came across cut across from the meadow, we're now back to having done a full loop of this upper part of the trail, joining the trail that we'd come up here and gone up that way. So this is the end of that upper loop. So now we're getting back down towards the bottom of the trail. You can see the ACO building through the trees, and we're completing our tour of the trail. This is the last little loop of the trail here. So anyone who lives on the East Coast or is familiar with the woods here, the ash trees on the East Coast have been decimated by the emerald ash borer, and we have two examples, this one and another one lower on the property, that Dave suggested rather than taking them down, Dave suggested we leave this stump as potential den trees or areas for woodpeckers to get food. So we're trying to allow that kind of use of trees rather than just eliminating them. So this grassy swath was a trail that we originally cleared just to start getting up into the woods many years ago. So I think if we keep clearing our new trail, mowing it a couple of times a year, it will end up very much like this is. So our new trail now cuts across here and winds back up that way. Also, there's some additional features that our landscape designer designed on the lower part of the property, perhaps to put in some rain gardens, and we're also planning to develop a trail that's even more accessible because it'll be down close to the to our building. And this is where Dave envisioned a couple of rain gardens with a trail that comes off the lawn and comes down here and by the little creek behind the laboratory building. So the idea is that the trail will come along the back of the laboratory building here and meander down to come along this creek. It's a totally different ecosystem on our property, but it's a wonderful area for people to be able to enjoy. As I said, a completely different feeling from the rest of the property. So I hope you enjoyed our preview of the trail. We're looking forward to having people just be able to come and walk on it in its current condition. We're taking it a step at a time, trying to just have a clear trail for people to use. Eventually, we will decide whether it's something we want to do to complete a very finished surface to the trail, which is the grand design. But I have no doubt that this is going to be usable just the way it is. So all of this is going to take money and support from people. We hope you will contact the college to volunteer to help out in maintaining and keeping the trail cleared. And we also will need money to continue to do that. So we look forward to your donations to help us use our property in this new way. And we hope we will see you at some point in the near future. Thank you.